Again, Antoine Williams here, co-founder of the Advancement League, and today we have an extremely special guest for Insider Call and Informal Conversation, Mr. Greg Jackson. How's it going, Greg?
It's going well, going well. How are you guys? Good to see you.
We're doing good, doing good. We're lucky enough to also have members of our Health Impact Club here on the line. And in addition to those on the line, we've gotten a number of questions from our members. We've always believed that the future of health is together. And by that, mean that we have to collaborate with folks in the space. And we also have to get creative and reach out to folks around and outside of the space. And Greg, if someone was to Google your name right now, the first thing that would pop up is mobilizing action around gun reform. So folks may not correlate gun reform to health, but we feel like in order to move the metric around healthy food, housing, and mental health, we have to figure out a way to push policies. And you've done that. So we're happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That's awesome. Absolutely. So I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself, but some of the words that jump out to me when I look at your bio are executive director, community organizer, political strategist, and issue advocate. So what am I missing? Who is Greg?
Well, no, that's pretty good. I'm also a social athlete. I play flag football and basketball, and also a huge Marvel fan and a lover of all types of music. I'm a piano kick right now. It's like my little Afro beats vibes. If anybody listens to that. But yeah, that's what I would add. But yeah, I could definitely do a full intro though, beyond that. But yeah, those are some extra things to add in there.
I love it. So we'll jump into it, but I have to ask because I was just having this debate. Afro beat. So Wizkid or Burna Boy?
Burna.
Yeah, say no more. Burna. All right, we're gonna be all right. We're gonna be all right. Oh man. So we'll jump right into it. You mentioned social athlete. You mentioned policy. I think when folks think politics, they think about DC. So just for the audience, where is home for you? Are you in DC?
Yeah. I'm based in DC in Anacostia in the southeast side.
Okay. And how did you, just for the folks that don't know, if you can just tell us how you ended up in the gun reform world? When did it become a passion, and what are some of the next steps as you kind of look forward?
Yeah. So there's kind of like there's kind of like I would say four worlds in the gun violence space. There's gun safety, so advocates who focus on safety and responsible ownership. There's gun control advocates that are focused on access. There's gun violence prevention, which are people who are pushing for proactive solutions to prevent violence. And then there's this entire urban gun violence or community violence space that's kind of hyper-focused on how violence impacts inner city and Black and brown folks. For me, I came to DC as someone who loved politics, who had worked in politics, who was passionate about it in college and high school, and saw it as a way to help change the world. And I started as a campaigner, volunteering for Barack Obama, like so many others, and did both of those campaigns and wound up doing a slew of different campaigns and advised around 36 different congressional and Senate campaigns over the early kind of part of my career. But in April of 2013, at a party, leaving a party with my cousins, I was shot as an innocent bystander in Washington, D.C. And the bullet that hit me actually hit two arteries. And so I nearly bled to death, and I had to go through 6 different surgeries, 6 months of recovery. So physically, it was really trying. But what was also trying was how I was treated. When I arrived at the hospital, I was surrounded by police officers and investigators who interrogated me before I could go into surgery, asking, why was I out that late? Who was I with? Where was I buying something? Where's the gun? All these questions that where they really looked at me as a criminal first and a victim second. And that was very frustrating and really traumatizing at the same time. Even when I was in the hospital, the nurses treated me as if, I was less than. or that I was involved in some street life or gang life. And they refused to even let me see my family until hours after my first surgery. And so there was just so much trauma wrapped around how they treat Black men and that are experiencing this type of crisis. I was also shot, a few days after Sandy Hook, and I saw the direct contrast. And and today is the 10-year anniversary of the Sandy Hook shooting, but a direct contrast into how the world see and perceived and treated that tragedy versus what was happening to me and Black and brown folks all over the country. And I also saw that even with all of that, Congress failed to take action. And I was shot 2 days after the Senate failed to pass their first chance at some gun violence prevention, or really a gun control legislation around background checks. And so I came out of that experience really fired up to do something different, and really fired up to take a lot of the political experience and relationships that I've had and focus it on this issue. And the first thing I did was go to the candidates and the members of Congress I used to work for and ask them to take action. And a lot of them dismissed me and dismissed the crisis and kind of brushed it under the rug like it wasn't a big deal. And that's something that the police got to handle. But I knew firsthand this is about more than just police. And so from then on, I decided to do more work locally in my community to help address violence and then ultimately join Community Justice. Our organization is focused on advancing policy, changing the narrative, and organizing to reduce gun violence in Black and brown communities. And since I was shot, nearly 1 million people have been shot or killed by gun violence. And when you look at homicides specifically, over 80% of those individuals are Black or brown. And this is something that now is the number one premature cause of death for Black men, for all youth, and the number 2 premature cause of death for Black women and Latino men. And so we know that just those numbers alone make it a public health crisis, just despite why it's happening or how it's happening, whether it's a car accident or fires or buildings falling over. When you're losing that many lives to one such issue, it becomes a public health crisis. And because of that, we've been fighting really aggressively to get our political officials to treat it as such and respond with a public health, all of government approach, and not just the same old criminal response or crime control responses that have frankly failed over the years. And last thing I'll just share on that point is, this all is kind of bubbling up because we saw since COVID a 35% increase in homicides in America, and 39% in the Black community. And this is a time where all other forms of crime have reduced, but we saw this huge spike in gun violence. And I think it's a testament that the root causes and things that lead to violence are not just criminally involved. It's all these other health determinants that lead to such crisis. And I think it's an affirming time for us to be pushing for some of these public health and more comprehensive solutions. So that's my story and kind of how it ties into the work we do now.
No, and I can appreciate that. You just gave us an audio to the passion that we read as we see you, fighting the good fight, taking it directly to politicians, leaders, activists, and everybody in between. A lot to unpack there, but one thing that you said many times over is public health, and that this is truly a health crisis. And members of the Advancement League, friends of the Advancement League, I would say represent the individuals in healthcare and around healthcare that truly want to move the needle, that want to do things right. We like to call ourselves the kindest collection of healthcare talent. So you have a group of individuals that run hospitals that have decided to leave the traditional healthcare space to go start organizations to do things better. So I think hearing your story in itself, we stop this conversation right now, as a win, because you just gave a real life living example of some of the issues and challenges, whether it be bias in the healthcare eco space in our hospitals, or trying to tie in some of those traditional healthcare related things to public health issues, of course, gun reform being one of them. So thank you for that. The other thing you did, and you kicked it off right with this, and I think this is going to be important for our members, those individuals that represent our Health Impact Club, and that is that you broke gun reform up into specific buckets, gun safety, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's something that we're certainly going to take. I mentioned that we're uberly focused on healthy food, housing, and mental health, which we describe as happiness. So those are three big buckets. And it sounds like we have an opportunity that as we look to really make a difference and make an impact to further cascade those down. So you've been successful. Of course, the work continues. But again, policy passing, the political partnership, what would be some guidance for individuals that, maybe they're a director of operations for a hospital, but they are a member of the Advancement League. So in their free time, they want to combat big issues, social determinants of health. How does one get started or who should one partner with to really move the metric and do some good things if we're focused on one community at a time?
Yeah, I mean, as it pertains to gun violence and the success we've had, the first thing that we did is we had to achieve some type of mentality shift in our political leaders. We had to get them to look at gun violence in Black and Brown communities as not just a crime issue, but a public health issue. And that was hard to do because all the media stereotypes violence in our communities as connected to, they stereotype it like some episode of Power or something. It's like, oh, it must have been the gangs or some drug related. But when you look at the statistics, that's not what's happening to us. Like, 30% of homicides in our community are connected to another felony, but 70% are not. And only 11% of homicides are connected to any known gang. So if you're framing this picture that it's all gangs and felony criminal activity, then you're only looking at at most 30% of the deaths that are happening. The other 70 are primarily interpersonal conflict between people who know each other. A fight that goes too far, a domestic dispute that gets out of hand, or an abuser in the home, or a child who responds to a bully, or unfortunately, exactly what we saw with the Takeoff situation, where an argument goes one step too far and a bystander gets shot. And that's almost exactly how I was shot too. And that's what 70% of the violence is. And so if you're taking a crime-only approach, you're gonna fail no matter how well you move forward with that crime-only approach. And we saw how this failed during the crack epidemic. The crack epidemic was a health crisis, not a criminal crisis, but America took a crime control approach, mass incarcerated so many Black folks, and failed to actually resolve the issue. And they learned that lesson, and now they're taking a different approach with opioids. So we had to really get that mindset shift done with our elected officials, with our members of Congress, and with the White House. And on December 21st of 2020, President Biden was the first major leader to acknowledge this as a public health crisis and a public health epidemic on the record. And that gave us enough firepower to get at least the Democratic side bought in and to get agencies and leaders all bought in. Now, once we got that mentality shift, the next question is, okay, well, if this is a public health crisis, what does the public health response look like? And luckily, all of us, everybody that's watching this, we've lived through a public health response with COVID-19. And that public health is primarily people-centered. But for us, we look at how do you intervene or stop the spread? How do you address the risk factors or the things that encourage the spread? And then lastly, how do you get to the root causes that prevents this spread from happening in the first place? And it's the same thing with gun violence. We painted that picture of here are the short-term interventions we can do to save lives today. Here are the risk factors that are fueling this cycle of violence that we can reduce through changes today. And then here are the bigger systemic institutional problems that are creating these risk factors that we later have to intervene and address. And here's what you can start working on long-term. But we started with just here's the intervention. And for us, intervention is providing more resources for victims that are traumatized, access to trauma care for people who've been shot, hospital-based and community-based violence intervention programs that de-escalate conflicts that are known in the community, behavioral health and therapeutic programs that focus on at-risk individuals, whether it's young men young adults, young women, or youth, but then also programs that look at healing and helping people navigate through the trauma of loss or through the trauma of being harmed in hopes to reduce retaliation. Those are like short-term interventions. And the first thing we laid out to Congress was, hey, this is what's needed. This is the first step for a public health approach. We need resources. And well, Congress would say, well, I'm sure we're investing in this somewhere. And we looked at all of Congress, and this is a big policy team, and we found $15 million. That was it for all of America. Now you look at how much money we're pouring into COVID-19. We look at how much money we're spending, billions and almost trillions of dollars on the opioid response. But gun violence is actually taking more lives than the opioid crisis. But every other major health issue, HIV, even sepsis, like all these other crises are getting billions of dollars in research and interventions and programs and pharmaceutical strategies. But when you look at gun violence, it was only 15 million that was proactive and prevented, and everything else was poured into law enforcement. So we painted that case and told that story, and then we showed them like, hey, this is what we need to see. We need to see more resources, and here's how much we think that will take. We got the White House bought in on April 8th of 2021. Biden did his first series of executive actions, and he unlocked about $12 billion in existing programs to now include these strategies. But we knew that that's not enough because that's not money that's dedicated to us. So then we turned around and went to Congress and said, hey, here's what Biden and the White House are doing, but it's not enough. Where are y'all at? And that's when we went CBC member, CAC member, progressive, every individual, and just ask them straight up, like, if this is an issue that you care about, and this is about more than just mass shootings that you see on TV, then prove it, step in and help us fight for more resources to intervene violence today. That effort wound up with us creating about $100 million annual in a new program called the Community Violence Intervention and Prevention Initiative through the DOJ. And it also led to us creating a new bill called the Break the Cycle of Violence Act, which has $6.5 billion in it that has not gotten through the Senate, but made it all the way through the House. But for us, it was mentality shifts, laying out the full picture of what it takes to address the problem, identifying, for us, it was 2 to 3 major things that can be done right now. And then going to the top and getting that buy-in. And then once we got buy-in from Biden, then we can work through Congress. And then now that we have Biden and every Democrat in Congress on the House and Senate in support of our approach, now we can go to governors, mayors, city council members, county commissioners. And unless you are just all out anti-Democrat, or you're just all out, anti any type of violence reduction efforts, you can't really argue with it, The other cool thing that we did is we also engaged the CDC, and we pushed them to start creating reports around this because they're the authority on public health crises, at least in the eyes of government. And so they've started to roll out different reports and studies, and we even got their director to do a one-on-one interview, I believe it was on CNN or 60 Minutes, on gun violence and how this is a public health crisis. So now we have not only the leader of the free world, but we have a very verified, validated voice in the Center for Disease Control that are showing the facts, the research, and being a spokesperson. So we have the political power and we have the academic power. The last big piece is really the people power. And so we launched a campaign called the Fund Peace Initiative, and we recruited 340 local organizations, community-led organizations in neighborhoods that have been impacted by violence, whether that was the NAACP chapter, a church, a mom support group, a survivor network. We brought them all together and we showed them, hey, here's what we're doing in Congress. Here's what we're doing in the White House. Here's what we got moving nationally, but it means nothing if it doesn't get to Detroit or to Atlanta or to Baton Rouge. And we gave them all of this data, this intel, these quotes, these video clips, printouts, all of this stuff. And we're now coaching them through advocating locally. And it's amazing when someone who is a little NAACP chapter president in Raleigh, North Carolina, can go to the governor and say, hey, this is something that the president, the CDC director, every Democrat in Congress wants to see get done. And you, governor of North Carolina, haven't done anything on this yet. What's up? And now that person has not just that local voice, but now has the validation of all of this national work. And speaking of North Carolina, they are now investing for the first time millions of dollars into violence intervention at the state and local level. And prior to our activism, they had no clue what any of this stuff even meant. They never even heard of it. So I will just say that's kind of like the quick blueprint of how we went about it and how I would encourage you to go about it. I think it's narrative change, it's policy recommendations and advocacy, and then it's building political power to put pressure where needed to get it done.
Oh man, you just gave us the playbook to get things done. I want to dive into that a little bit more. One, because you mentioned Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. Every year for the past 2 years, and we're coming back in 2023, we host what we call the Young Health Leaders Summit, where we bring in hundreds of individuals from across the country. We talk about pressing issues in healthcare, whether it be with our pharmaceutical partners, our insurers. We talk about career development. We talk about health tech. We talk about dying and, that aging in place and loneliness epidemics that are happening. But most importantly, it's built around community impact. So each individual is broken up into teams. We have some amazing sponsors. We break those teams up into specific areas, and they have 24 hours to go do amazing things with that cash in the community. So it's a feel-good story. We're talking thousands, not millions. So with that being said, Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina, I'm going to ask you to scale back a little bit. We are serious about doing and serious about action. So I'll tell you what we have. We've mobilized a community of healthcare experts, folks in and outside of hospitals, folks in the community space, folks in the health tech space. All of these individuals have one thing in common, and that is that they care about social impact and social determinants of health and making a difference in the world. We have the will, as we think about those three buckets that we continue to mention: housing, healthy food, and mental health. We have awareness, we have data. So we're laser focused on making a difference right now in the Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina community as we go back in 2023. So we're going to shift to masterclass here. If you were in our shoes, right, thinking small scale, who are you looking to get in front of? Who are you looking to partner with? What's kind of that 3 to 5 step approach for us to truly move the needle, make a difference, and just get the ball rolling so that, years from now, we're talking about, $1 million change and large scale impact, similarly to what you all have achieved in the gun reform space?
Yeah. I think the first thing to just internalize, the government has the money. They got the money. Don't let them tell you nothing. They got it, especially in a time where so much money has been moved down to respond to COVID. So what I would do first and foremost is just really land on a strong goal or key things that you want to accomplish, and make sure they're really serious with deadlines and how much you want to reach and milestones of how much resources you want. The second thing is timing is really important with budget advocacy. A lot of times there are already kind of pre-built moments where you can weigh in on the budget process, but you just have to figure out when those kind of moments are and where those pressure points are. The third thing is I would just power map and really understand who controls the purse strings. In Congress, it wasn't Nancy Pelosi, it was Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro. Like, she was the one who oversaw the budgeting process. And she's someone who never gets a lot of attention. So for you to run up on her and throw these proposals and presentations, for us, we had a very captive audience with her. And once we got her on our side, we were able to move so much. But if we were just looking at CNN, we would be chasing Nancy Pelosi all over the world and fighting for her attention, which would have took years, right? And so really understanding who's in charge of the dollars and who really makes the decisions and disseminates them, and then focusing like laser sharp on influencing that person or those group of people is really, really important, because a lot of times the decision makers are not always the political targets of activism. And then lastly, I would just say build your power politically, but through partnerships and collaborations. but do it strategically. You know, if you know that the people you're trying to influence are very heavy in the faith community, then you need some faith partners. If you know that they're a stickler for education and strengthen our education programs, or then we got to build education contacts to echo your ask, right? But you kind of need to understand what makes the decision makers tick, and then build your partnerships and your advocacy efforts around them. The last thing is what tactics you use matters too, because everyone doesn't respond to public attention. So having a big Twitter campaign might be ineffective, or doing a press conference might be ineffective, or a rally might be ineffective, or a letter to the editor might be ineffective. You really have to think about that decision-making community and what makes them tick, like what actually influences them. What are they excited to be a part of? What are they afraid to be exposed for? And really lean into those efforts. We've found that people who are a little further behind the curtain in the budgeting process, they like being back there. And so they don't want any public attention. So if you give them public attention, they'll reject you. If you just come out the gates with like some big press thing, they'll reject you because you're already an enemy. But sometimes it's just talking to them and maybe threatening public attention. And that's enough to get them to move, right? And so once you kind of understand who you're working with, you can figure out how to get it done. With our work with Biden, we knew Biden had a tall hill to climb, rebuilding faith with Black communities, especially as those who've been impacted from the war on drugs and that mass incarceration era. So we knew that we had a little bit of outweighed political influence because of the communities we represented. And so we knew for him, the biggest thing he wanted was for us to be quiet or for us to be celebratory. So we never had to be aggressive. We never had to say negative things. We never had to bash him on social media. We never had to do that. We just had to be very clear what we wanted, show them, show the administration why it was impactful, but then also show the administration how we're going to celebrate and amplify these wins if they are achieved. So we never even had to be negative to get what we wanted to get done. And so I just think like understanding the decision makers is very, very important to inform your strategy before you just, jump out the window and start doing rallies or marches or press conferences or anything like that. So that's what I recommend.
No, I appreciate that. I took so many notes here, and I think the overarching themes are partnerships, which we live and die by, and priorities. Sounds like doubling down on our goals, being extremely intentional. And then, again, back to the future of health being together, really leveraging on partners, calling out the elephant in the room. Each of us all have day jobs. Some of our individuals have dedicated their lives to this as we have, but there are folks right now while we're on this call that are doing the work. And it would be a messed up on our part to not reach out and try to collaborate with them. So I appreciate you sharing that. One last question before we wrap up, and this is from one of our leaders, and I'll tee it out. Each industry, healthcare being no different, has its dinosaurs. So I would say it's immovable mountains, right? Sometimes these dinosaurs are aligned, sometimes they aren't. We've chosen the path to try to partner with them, and that's why you see taglines in our marketing like pharma as friends. Pharmaceutical companies have a certain reputation. We're trying to get them at the table and collaborate with them and see how we can do things together. Payers as partners. Anybody with insurance and have heard stories about insurance, we know what comes with that, but we're hoping that we can partner with them in different ways and kind of energize and mobilize this new generation of health leader to do the same. So when we think about gun reform, the question is in relation to the NRA, and just the interactions with the NRA, what role they have with Congress, and just, how you're moving forward, understanding that they are one of those dinosaurs and in some cases immovable objects that would be better suited to be aligned with them. So loaded question, but hopefully you can glean some insight so we can think about how we approach these same giants in our space.
Yeah. So with us, we see access to the firearm and ownership of the firearm is one of the largest risk factors to violence, but not the problem, right? because there is much more that we can do to save lives independent of access to the firearm. And so I think that helps from our organization's perspective. We're already coming in, like it's not a us versus them. It's here's all that needs to be done, but you all are really making one of these risk factors really damaging, right? But there are also so much more that we need to get done. And so I think that's really, really important. I think the other thing that the NRA was so effective in the 70s and the 80s to push forward their message and their policies. But I think the biggest thing they were able to accomplish that hurts us now is that they polarized the issue of gun violence into a Second Amendment debate. And this is way more complex than the Second Amendment, but they've polarized it to where you either go left or right, either for guns or against guns. But when in reality, that's not how this issue works. There's so many intersections, especially in our communities. And there are so many moments where someone who is a gun owner can also become a victim, can also become a survivor, can also lose a loved one, can also harm someone else. There's just a whole spectrum of experiences that we as Black or brown folks go through. And it's not as simple as just having a gun or not. And so one big thing that we've been doing to strategically work around the NRA, I don't know if around is the right word, but kind of neutralize their influence, is by changing the debate. We're not trying to beat them at their debate. We're creating a whole new debate. And our new debate is that this is a public health crisis that deserves a public health response. And let's work together to develop what that is. That's very different from whether you have the right to have a firearm or not, and it's like, that's like, they've like simplified the debate to a point that makes it's almost futile to even decide that part when, and the other side of it too, which is really frustrating but challenging, is that even that debate is a long-term debate that is totally ignorant of the current crisis that we're in. I mean, the average gun has a lifespan of 19 years. So even if we banned and removed every gun out the country or every new purchase, we still have 20 years of tragedy to get through. And so if we're only thinking about the hardware, we're taking a long-term only approach, and we're also dismissing all the other complexities that leads to someone acting out violently. And I do think that's a very naive and a very privileged perspective to see things, because in Black and brown communities, we need more than lack of guns. We also need therapeutic support. We also need conflict resolution. We also need trauma-informed care and access to trauma care and better education and better housing opportunity. Like, there's a whole world of things we need that all led to that shooting, that just removing the gun is totally ignorant of why that conflict even blew up to that point. So so that's how we moved. I mean, we're not locking horns with the NRA. We think the NRA is what you call it, the dinosaur. And guess what? Dinosaurs are extinct. And the only reason they're a threat is because we keep thinking about them, not because they're actually eating people on the street. And that's how the NRA is. They've filed for bankruptcy multiple times, and their influence is waning. And we also know that when we passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act this year, it was the first gun violence bill passed in 30 years. And I was sitting in the hall when the Senate voted on it, and I watched Republicans in tears of joy after they voted for this. I saw them high-fiving each other. And I noticed that they want to fix this issue too. They just have been, in their own political way, held hostage by this big financial machine that they've been dependent on. But that financial machine is weakening every day. And the debate around and the solutions of how we address gun violence is no longer as simple as should you have a gun or not. So that's how we move. And I think we're crushing them right now as a movement, because they're not necessarily the premier focus. Like, their debate is not what we're debating. What we're debating is how do we solve a much bigger problem that they don't have solutions for, nor are they interested in trying to resolve, even when it's gun owners being shot, when it's Republicans being shot, when it's youth being shot, when it's their own champions being shot. One of their NRA champions was shot at a baseball practice a congressman was shot at a baseball practice, one of their biggest outspoken champions, and they had no response other than he should have been armed too. Like, what? You want people to be armed playing baseball? So they just don't have the answers. And I think we just don't pour a lot of energy into them. We are just building and running our race and fixing a real problem while they want to kind of, play in the sand on the playground.
Absolutely. Appreciate that. Sounds like that the transition isn't happening by choice or by force. The baton is being passed. We're blessed and fortunate to have folks like you in doing what you do in the gun reform space, and for all of our members and leaders that are trying to and actively doing the same in the what I would describe as community impact space. Happy to partner with the dinosaurs, but nonetheless, change will occur. Sounds like we have every reason to stay optimistic. I'll say, Greg, this has been extremely beneficial. I'm certain that we'll stay in touch. Again, a big part of our Advancement League platform is to provide education and resources and community to our members. And you are now a part of that community. We'll definitely stay in touch. How can our folks get in touch with you, follow you, support? What's the best way?
Yeah, you can find us. We're www.cjactionfund.org, and we're on social media at CJ Action Fund, Twitter, Instagram, all of that. I'm the Action Jackson on Instagram. I'm kind of boycotting Twitter right now for obvious reasons, so just hit me on Instagram. And that's how you can reach out to us, and we would love your support. I mean, we're still growing as an organization, so donations are welcomed, partnership is welcome, volunteerism is welcomed, but there's just so much that we can do, and there's so much work to be done, especially on the more health or traditional health side of this crisis that we need more leaders pouring into. So I appreciate this partnership and this chance to speak with you all.
Absolutely, man. We'll be in person, in the flesh, in full form, July 31st through August 2nd of 2023 in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. So if anybody from your network can be there at the Young Health Leader Summit, if you can pull up, man, it will be much appreciated. We'll talk soon, man.
All right. Thank y'all. Have a great day.
Yes, sir. You too.
All right. Peace.